All right, hey guys. Let's continue our talk over chapter 10. We've gone through kind of how evolutionists think things got started and things got set in motion. So let's talk about where they think all of the different species come from. Now, I wanted to first of all let you know, sorry that I am not there with you. This was completely unplanned, but on Friday afternoon at school, my oldest son, Christopher, who's 9 and struggles with arthritis in his right knee really bad. He had an accident on the playground at school and ended up breaking his leg. And so I'm home with him right now playing Dr. Mom, trying to help him and get him into the orthopedic doctor and all that because it's a pretty good break. So we want to make sure there's no surgery needed. And he's in a lot of pain and having a hard time. So, but I will be back. So just as a reminder, Friday is your test over chapter 10. It is written tests. This is the written test, but remember that it is half a test grade. And so the other half of your test grade is coming from that creation assignment that I gave you last Friday. So be working on that. Make sure you followed instructions and that you're doing a good job there. That is designed to help cushion the test grade for this chapter. All right, so let's finish talking about this. So looking at what evolutionists say as far as history of species, a lot of times what they really look at is instead of looking at individuals, they'll look at the population. And so remember what a population is. Remember that a population is a group of individuals all the same species. And so they'll look at that group as a whole to kind of help, because remember, they're looking over long periods of time. So it's a lot easier to look at a population because it's, a big group to look at. And so some of the things they'll look at what mutations were good and helped increase the fitness. And so remember, an increase in fitness is the ability to be able to reproduce, keep those genes moving along, passing it to the next generation. And so they'll look at things like allele frequency and genetic drift. Really all that means is like what alleles are occurring more often than not. Just for a broad example, is brown hair more common, or blonde hair or black hair, something like that. And then any drift in genetics or a major change in the genes within this population. And of course, natural selection, the big one, that's going to choose, nature is going to choose which of these things are the best and needs to be passed on to the next generation. So they would say that these mutate between the mutations, the natural selection, certain adaptations or genes are going to be chosen to be passed on to the next generation. Eventually, over millions and millions of years, with all of these mutations and natural selection occurring, you can eventually end up with what's called speciation, where you actually make a new species. So you need to know that definition. Speciation is literally the formation of a new species. And so, like I said, that takes a long time, according to the evolutionist. You can see adaptations like we saw on the finches on Galapagos, where their beaks changed, but they didn't make a new species. So they're saying for this to occur, you need a lot of time. And then, of course, part of the definition of species is that they need to be able to reproduce. If you can't reproduce, well, your species is done for. So in order for this new species that was made to reproduce, it needs other organisms of that same new species to reproduce with. Because usually what happens is this new species that was made cannot reproduce with the original species that it came from. So it needs more species like it to be able to reproduce. If that's not possible, like I said, that species cannot continue. And so we say that anything that does not allow reproduction to happen, we call that a reproductive barrier. And so you need to know this term as well. Literally, what is the job of a barrier? It stops things. It does not allow anything to move, to go past. And so put those two together, reproductive barrier, literally anything that will stop reproduction from occurring, which effectively is going to end that species. Now, there's a few things that could cause a reproductive barrier. One, the new species could be naturally sterile. There are some hybrids that we see this, that the baby of the hybrid, they're sterile. They cannot reproduce. Something else could be the behavior of that species, their habitat, the structure. These are things that could not allow reproduction to happen. Okay, and so more for my pretty pictures for you guys. Phylogenetic tree. So the goal of evolutionists is they want to prove their point that everybody came from a common ancestor. So they'll make up these cute little charts called a phylogenetic tree, which is basically these pictures trying to show all of these common ancestors. And they could look a couple of different ways. You could see one like this where you have a starting point, and this is like the oldest common ancestor. Then you've got, branches coming off, and eventually, you can see that everybody came from the same thing. Or you could have something like this, where, again, trying to show all of these different common ancestors, like these guys are related, and they're related to this, but they're also, you can go back and they have this in common. And so this guy and this guy would have this guy in common. And so they can look a couple different ways. They can be pretty basic, or they can get really complex. Again, just trying to show how everything is connected. And now when they look at man, when we go getting more complex here, we'll go from monkey to man. They say that the earliest, or the predecessor of the modern day man, the early humans, would be what's called a hominid. And so remember, we looked at the beautiful pictures of Lucy last Friday. And so they would say, we came from things like her. Something else that they're really kind of hyped about and focusing on right now is something called mitochondrial DNA. For those of you like me that like true crime, you might have heard of this before. Mitochondrial is a type of DNA, but it specifically comes from the mother. And so that's actually interesting and good to know. And in case you could not tell, it is found in the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. This mitochondrial DNA lives in the mitochondria, comes from the mother, and the goal that evolutionists use is to show that we all came from one woman. Well, of course, creationists could use that argument too, but we're going to come to a different conclusion than they would. So that's very popular right now, trying to show how all humans are related back to this one woman. Lucky for you, it was not Lucy the monkey. All right. And so then it's our turn to kind of like tear their arguments apart. And we've kind of been doing that throughout the chapter. So some of this might be a little bit of a review. First of all, starting out with how the Earth started, they don't really have any evidence or information on how this happened. Physicists really struggle with this one. How can they account for the lack of dark matter that was supposed to account for all of these massive galaxies? And then in order for the Big Bang to occur, you need all of this mass and gravity. And physicists are like, well, where did that come from? How was, let's, explain to me where that came from to help me out here. And then, how do we get the, amino acids to go to the proteins to go to eventually making, DNA and RNA? Like, how do we get these complex molecules? And I can't remember his name. But there is a doctor, a chemist, who kind of like Dr. Ken Ham does. This chemist tears apart the evolution theory from the chemistry side of things, which is actually super interesting. Usually when we think about tearing down the evolution theory, we think about biology. But look at the chemistry of it. Look at these molecules. These are complex molecules. And they didn't just come from nothing. And in order for them to be there, everything had to be there at the same time. There's actually a term that fans of intelligent design, it's called a irreducible complexity, that all the pieces of this thing needed to be together at the same time, perfectly functioning in order for it to work. And so, again, they don't have the evidence and information to explain how we got to where we are as far as the molecules come from. And in fact, when you're looking at the amino acid side of things, they've done experiments to try to show, okay, well, if you've got the right ingredients, amino acids can be formed. Well, in this experiment that they did to try to prove their point, the controls, the temperature, pressure, all the variables had to be very, very specific. And how can you prove that the early Earth had these very specific conditions in which these amino acids could be made? So it's not realistic. And so then again, how do we go from non-living to living? This idea that life can come from non-life is called abiogenesis, like creating life from nothing. And so they struggle with that. And then with the fossil record, I know I've talked about this, the Cambrian explosion. We talked about the fossil record and how you've got layers of rocks and blah blah blah. And so we say that on the bottom should be the oldest, and then the newest rocks should be on the top. And you should start out with the little complex guys down at the bottom, and then as you go up, you get more complex. Problem is you have something called the Cambrian explosion, where all of a sudden, instead of seeing this nice little gradual increase from really simple to super complex, all of a sudden you have this point in time where you've got super complex mixed in with simple, and it wasn't a slow gradual increase. It was like boom, everything was there, everything you can imagine, super small, simple to major, big, complex dinosaurs. And they can't explain why that is. Creationists can, because God created everything within 6 24-hour days. So of course you're going to see this explosion of life. And so and something else, there's no missing link. There's no evidence anywhere of one species turning into another. Like, shouldn't we see this? Shouldn't there be something showing us that happened? And then you saw this in the video with Dr. Kim Ham. In order for evolution to work, information needs to increase. That is not what we see at all. In fact, over time, you actually see a decrease in information. So this does not work. That's not even, we can't just make up stuff. That's not how anything works. Look at entropy, how as energy is dispersed over time, it becomes more and more unusable. So how can we just go against the laws of science here and saying that information is increasing? It just doesn't work. So in order for evolution to work, we need to increase in information, but that's not what we see. We see a decrease in information. God gave Adam and Eve all the genetic information they needed to get the diversity in what we see today. But we don't see new information being made. And so here's the thing with natural selection, we see a decrease in information because certain information is being chosen to be passed on, others is being chosen to, not be passed on. So again, that these two things don't fit together, but evolutionists say they do. And then unreliable dating methods. I've talked about the radiometric dating and how that has been widely discredited, but they still use it. They use all of these methods to date rocks, but there's no outside standard for reference. In science, you need a standard to compare to, and they just don't have that. And so that's a big fallacy or a big issue within their methods. And then, of course, looking at the history of man, where did Adam and Eve come from? Were they the first humans? Did they come from monkeys? There's so many questions there. And then if they weren't the first humans, then when did sin first happen? Of course, with evolution, you have to have death occurring. So you've got millions and millions of years before humans are even there. So, we just have a lot of issues with their story. Okay, so what I want you guys to do is make sure that you've read and taken notes over 10.6 because that's what I just talked about. We'll finish up with 10.7, which is the Bible story of what happened, how we got here. And like I said, test on Friday. Be ready for that. That is not changing. Creation assignment due Friday. Get your Google slide presentation ready. You'll just have to share it with me. When you're done, you can share it early if you want, but it is due Friday by your class period, not like 11 o'clock Friday night. It is due by the start of your class period on Friday. All right. I hope to see you guys soon. I would appreciate any prayers for my son, and hope you guys have a great day.